Please, let's just talk about this some more, okay? Like I said, Darla, there's nothing more to talk about. You obviously don't love me or, at the very least, you don't love me enough to keep from straying, and you obviously still have feelings for Randy. This is a completely unacceptable situation. You've had 7 months to figure it out, and you obviously still haven't. Apparently, all of my friends and family were right. I never should have gotten involved with a woman who was still married. Well, I'll never make that mistake twice. I threw my duffel bag in the front passenger's seat and climbed in. Dalton, please, I'm begging you. Come back in the house so we can talk about this some more. I gripped the steering wheel hard and took a few deep breaths. I'm gonna go to Danny's place for the night. I'm too pissed off right now to talk about this rationally. My advice to you, Darla, is to take the rest of the night and figure out what the hell you want. I'll be back home tomorrow at noon. If you still want to be with me, we'll talk about it. If you decide you want to give Randy another shot, I'll expect you to be gone by the time I get home. Darla stood there in the garage, sobbing as she watched me pull out and drive away. Immediately, I began to wonder if I was being irrational and too impulsive by doing what I was doing. Was I running away? Was I cutting my losses? Was I pushing Darla away? Or was I just being an a-hole? Maybe it was all of the above. Maybe it was none of the above. I just knew I had to get away to think. I called Danny on his cell. He was still working and wouldn't be done with his shift until 11. He said I was more than welcome to crash at his place and to just let myself in. Danny didn't press me for details. I just told him that I confronted Darla and everything went straight to hell in a handbasket. We both had keys to each other's houses, so that was not an issue. Danny lives in a nice 3-bedroom ranch house on the southwest side of Royal Fork. I let myself in and took possession of his spare bedroom. The other spare bedroom he uses for a home office. His basement is fully finished, also, and has 2 large rooms. One of them is a TV lounge with a pool table. The other room in the basement Danny uses for his large Engage model railroad layout. I used to think he was kind of a kid at heart for playing with trains at 30 years of age. But the more Danny told me about his model railroading, the more it intrigued me. I would come over to his place a lot and sit for hours watching him add more detail to the hills, trees, water features, and miniature buildings and vehicles. It was almost as intoxicating as sitting and watching a fire. Maybe it was simply a miniature world that Danny could escape to. A small world where the cares and problems of the real one disappeared. As I stood there looking at his layout, I wished it was a real place I could go to so I could get away from my issues with Darla. Danny got home around 11:15 p.m. We stayed up until nearly 3 in the morning with me going on about my problems. More than a few beers were drunk and more than a few tears were shed. Danny just kept the cores flowing the entire time and just listened. He would occasionally ask me a question to get me thinking, but never made any comments that were judgmental. True, he was never a fan of me dating Darla in the beginning, but that was only because she wasn't divorced from Randy yet. I couldn't figure the whole situation out. What the hell could Randy Jones have that I don't? For the first time in their lives, I was able to provide a comfortable, safe, and loving home for Darla and the kids. They never had to worry about where their next meal was coming from, whether they would have clothes to wear, or if the electricity was going to stay on. Randy Jones had never held a steady job for more than 6 months at a time without being laid off or fired. He never graduated high school but dropped out and never even got a GED. I couldn't figure out what the hell Darla ever saw in him to begin with, let alone whatever possessed her to marry him. She didn't get pregnant with Natalie until they had been married almost 2 years. But Randy refused to allow her to work, never let them get involved in any social activities, wouldn't even allow Darla to attend church with her parents. He didn't want her to be exposed to anyone or anything that might get her to see through all of his bullshit. So what in the hell could it be that would cause Darla to gravitate back to him? Just because Randy was finally sober? How the hell long could that last? Was his sobriety just a ploy to try to get her and the kids to come home? To be back under his thumb again? To be back under his total control again? Was that really the only kind of life Darla had ever known with Randy? The only kind of love she had ever gotten from him? None of this made any sense to me, and it made even less sense the more beer I got in me. I finally crashed on the spare bed around 3 o'clock in the morning. By the time I woke up, the alarm clock by the bed read 11:20. I sprang up from the bed and immediately threw on my pants and socks. grabbed my stuff, and made a beeline towards Danny's front door. Danny, who had been up for several hours already, was sitting on his living room sofa reading the Red River Falls paper. "Where the hell you going, bro?" he asked. "I gotta get home. I want to talk to Darla one last time before she goes, in case she decided to leave." Danny gave me a look that was somehow both sympathetic and disapproving at the same time. "Okay, all right, man. Good luck. Let me know if you need anything." "I will," I said as I raced towards my Taurus. Suddenly, I realized that I had made a mistake by not staying and talking to Darla. I realized how much I loved her and the kids, and I didn't want them to leave, at least not without talking things out. As I pulled around the corner to the street in front of my house, my heart sank into my stomach. There was Randy's shitty, rusty old Chevy parked in my driveway. There was another vehicle there, in equally bad condition, which must have belonged to Randy's mother. Darla, Randy, and his mother were all loading their stuff into the back of Randy's pickup truck. I parked my car along the curb and got out. I just stood there watching them for a few minutes before Darla realized I was there. All of them stopped what they were doing and just stared at me for a few moments. Finally, Donna said to Randy, "Give us a few minutes, will you?" Randy set the box he was carrying down in the back of the truck. Darla walked over to me. We were generally out of earshot of everyone as long as we didn't shout. "Dalton, she started. "Don't," I said. "Don't go. Stay for a while and let's talk this out, okay?" "Dalton, we're almost finished loading. Who cares? It's just stuff. The only things I care about in that house are you and the kids." "I gotta believe, Darla, that there was a reason you left Randy. There's a reason you ended up here with me. I just don't want you to make a mistake by running back to Randy." "I'm not running, Dalton. You were right last night. I still have feelings for Randy, and it isn't fair to you to be with you while my heart and my thoughts are with Randy." I stood there, head down, tears streaming down my cheeks. "There's a reason you left Randy, Darla. You know it and I know it. After everything else you went through with him before, can you really say that you would be happier with him than you are with me? I've given you a home here, Darla, a decent car to drive, clothes, beds, and toys for the kids. You guys never have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. Do you really think that Randy can provide all that? Do you really want to go back to living in an apartment again, with all of you crammed in there like sardines? A home is more than just a house, Dalton. A life is more than just stuff and material things. I understand that, Darla, but you still need a good roof over your heads, clothes on your backs, and food on the table, too. You were really amazing to us, Dalton, while we're here. I am sorry." I looked away in frustration. I didn't want to be seen crying in front of Randy Jones, but it was getting harder and harder to control my emotions by the minute. Why couldn't you have been honest with me from the beginning then? Why sneak around on me? Why cheat on me with your soon-to-be ex-husband? "I don't know, Dalton," Darla said, exasperated. "I guess maybe part of it was because of the fact that Randy and I are still technically married. I suppose part of me felt like I was cheating on Randy with you instead of the other way around. What about the kids? Do you really think Randy is going to step up to the plate and turn into Father of the Year material? I can't make any promises, Dalton, but he really seems to have changed. He finally seems like the man I always hoped he would become." I didn't know what else to say. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer, and neither could she. "Please stay," I whispered, trying to hug her. "I know in my heart this is where you belong." "I belong with my family, Dalton," she sobbed. "Is it because of how I reacted last night? If it is, then I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But can't you and the kids just stay so we can talk it over? There's nothing left to talk about. I'm so sorry, Dalton." And she pulled away from me and headed back to Randy's truck. Randy just stood there looking at us with sort of a concerned but smirking look on his face. "Darla, wait a second," I said. Darla and Randy stood by his truck. The kids were already piled into the car belonging to the woman I assumed was Randy's mother, Beulah. I went in the house and quickly disconnected the Nintendo game system and piled all of the games, console and controllers into a box we had by the TV to keep them organized. It only took a couple of minutes. When I came back to the front door, Randy was waiting there for me. I was struck by the urge to punch him right in the throat. It wouldn't have taken much. I'm 6 feet 1 inch and Randy was maybe 5 feet 6 inches or 5 feet 7 inches. "Here," I said, handing him the box. "Take these for the kids." Randy looked the box over. "Sweet. I'm gonna have fun with this." "Hey kids," he hollered, turning and walking back towards his truck. "Look what Daddy brought out for ya." It was a punch in the gut as I heard Natalie and Nathan shriek and giggle with delight as they realized their games were coming with them. Darla quickly piled the kids into the back seat of Beulah's car and then gave me one last backward glance before climbing into Randy's truck. "Darla?" She got back out for a second. I threw her the keys to the Escape. "You might as well take the car. I'll call the bank Monday and have my name taken off the loan." She said nothing, just walked to the garage and backed her vehicle out. Before she got to the road, I stopped her. She rolled down the window as I approached. "Darla, there's one thing you need to know. If you leave here today, that's it. There won't be a second chance. I'm not going to be anybody's backup, and I'm not going to be anybody's plan B. I deserve better than that." Darla didn't know what to say other than, "I'm so sorry, Dalton." Then she backed out into the street, and I could see the tears streaking down her face. I couldn't understand how a woman could be so sad and emotional as she is ripping your heart out of your chest. In a way, it almost would have been easier if she was being a complete bitch about it. I stood at the front of my house like a statue, watching them pull away until they got to the end of the street before they turned left. I was on autopilot as I trudged up the stairs back to my living room. The silence was deafening as a once active house was now as quiet as a churchyard cemetery. I picked up my cell phone and dialed. A few seconds later, Danny answered. "Hey, it's me," I said. "What's up, bro?" "They're gone, Danny. They just left with Randy a couple minutes ago." Silence. "Ah, shit, Dalton. I'm so sorry. Hey, I'm not working today. I'll be over in a few minutes, okay?" "Yeah, that's cool," I replied monotone. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, Danny showed up at my door. We spent the rest of the day doing what guys have always done when they get dumped, drowning our sorrows. Danny didn't have to work that day, and I decided I would call in sick the next morning, which I was pretty sure I would be with all the beer Danny and I were drinking. Danny ended up crashing at my place that night and hung out with me for a good chunk of the next day, too. He didn't try to offer me a bunch of advice. He just listened and let me get everything off my chest and out of my system. The worst part, besides crawling into my bed alone at night, was walking by Natalie and Nathan's rooms and seeing them empty. Only their little beds remained. I had gotten so attached to them. I'm only a little over 31 years old and have plenty of time yet to start a family. But I couldn't help but come to feel like Natalie and Nathan were mine too. It was worse than just losing a girlfriend. Instead of one person, I had lost three. The pain was triple that of a typical breakup. I did my best to try and move forward over the next few weeks. It helped when I could try and focus on anything but Darla and the kids. I also did my best to try and avoid being around people we knew who might want to try and voluntarily tell me about Darla and the kids. The way to accomplish that was not to answer any Royal Fork rescue calls, so I took myself off the schedule for a couple of weeks. There are several of us from the Red River Falls Fire Department who live in Royal Fork. All but one of us are also members of the Royal Fork Volunteer Fire and Rescue Department. Several of Darla's friends happened to be volunteers on the department who ran with me on the rescue squad, which is what we called our volunteer ambulance service in Royal Fork. About 3 weeks had passed and Danny, being the good friend, decided I needed a night out of the house and an opportunity to quit moping. So we put on our boots and headed down to the Half Pint. It was Saturday, which is always line dancing night at the Half Pint, so the place would be busier than hell. It also meant that the place would be crawling with women, many of whom would be single. Danny and I sat at the bar swigging on a couple of beers. I realized a long time ago that I would never get invited to be on Dancing with the Stars. Unlike a lot of people, I needed a couple of beers in me before I had the courage to go out on the dance floor. The Half Pint was about as typical of a modern-day version of the Old West Saloon as you could get. In fact, it was exactly that, an Old West saloon, with a few modern updates like electricity, running water, and indoor toilets. The Half Pint was one of the oldest operating bars in the country and was the oldest continuously operating watering hole in the upper Midwest. Even Frank and Jesse James were rumored to have wet their whistles in this bar sometime around 1880. Danny and I had met up with a couple of our female friends that we knew locally. Meg and Diana were both volunteers on the local rescue squad, which is how we all knew each other. We had a good time just hanging out with them. Met and Diana were on a girl date, as they called it. Neither of their husbands enjoyed line dancing and didn't come to the bar tonight. I had absolutely no interest in either of them and would never hook up with one of them, regardless. I was friends with both Meg and Diana's husbands, who were also local volunteer firemen. The entire bar poured onto the dance floor around 11 o'clock. Brooks and Dunn's song Boot Scootin' Boogie, which is always the highlight of line dancing night at the Half Pint. Meg and Diana joined us, and we all had a blast, even though neither Danny nor I could brag about our dancing skills. For some reason, women just seemed to be more natural and uninhibited on the dance floor for some reason. We were all walking back to our table when I saw her and stopped dead in my tracks. It had been 3 weeks since she had left and I hadn't seen her. But there was Darla sitting in a corner booth with Randy. They looked like they were with a group of friends. To his credit, Randy appeared to be nursing a soda while Darla did the same. I was almost disappointed. I guess I wanted to be able to say, "I told you so," even though I still wanted her to be happy. I couldn't turn away from her fast enough before she looked up at me. She said something to Randy, who begrudgingly nodded, and then she got up and left her seat. I failed to understand why women feel the need to do this, but Darla walked over to our table. Immediately, Danny, Meg, and Diana realized they were in the middle of an uncomfortable situation. "Hey, Dalton," she said. She then said hello to everyone else, who all politely said hello back. I, however, pretended to be too busy sipping my beer. Dalton, do you have a couple of minutes so we can talk?" I looked around at my friends, who all looked like they were embarrassed for me. I knew this had to be equally as uncomfortable for them, as everyone in town was probably aware by now that Darla had left me. So I simply got up and led the way outside, which was the customary thing to do if one knew they were probably about to get into an argument or a fight. Pretty sure it was going to be one or the other. We got outside and rounded the corner and stopped in front of the next door business, which was a State Farm insurance office. "Well, you wanted to talk to me," I said, curtly. "What's up?" Darla was obviously taken aback by my abrupt manner. Well, I just wanted to see how you were doing." "I am fine." She stood there expecting more. "Just fine." "Yes, I'm fine. I'm fine. Danny's fine. Meg's fine. Diana's fine. We're all fine. Everybody's fine. Aren't you going to ask how the kids and I are doing? Do you want to tell me how the kids are doing?" "Well," she started, obviously regretting initiating the conversation, "I just thought you would like to know that the kids are good, but I thought you might like to know that they miss you too." I said nothing, just biding my time until Darla decided that she wanted to end the conversation so we could go back inside. "Dalton, come on. Please don't be like that," she pleaded. "Be like what, exactly?" "Like this," she stated. "I still want us to be friends, Dalton. The kids still want you to be their friend, too." "Gee," I chuckled. "Just a few months ago you were telling me how great of a father I could be to them. I think you told me that I was a natural at it, and the kids could have a real dad for the first time in their lives. We were at a different place then, Dalton. I didn't expect things to turn out this way, but I have to give my kids a chance at being a real family, with the one they started with. Randy has changed so much. In fact, the kids and I all agree that he's become a lot like." She was smart enough to stop and not finish the sentence, but I finished it for her. "Me? Is that what you were going to say, Darla? Randy is a lot like me? Let me correct a few things for you. I have never hit you. I have never swore at you and called you every name in the book. I have never threatened you. I have never been a dedicated alcoholic, nor have I ever put my addiction in front of my family. I have never walked out on my family and abandoned them. So, please, tell me again what it is that you think Randy Jones and I have so much in common." Darla drew a deep breath and tried to stifle her tears. "I just meant that Randy has changed a lot, Dalton. I want you to be happy for us. I want you to be happy for Natalie and Nathan. I'm not happy for you, Darla. I think you left me and took yourself and the kids back into the lion's den. I think it is just a matter of time when Randy gets comfortable and decides that he can start sneaking a beer again, here and there. And pretty soon one beer will lead to another, and another, and another, until, finally, his drinking will get out of control again, and then you'll be in the exact same shit storm you and the kids were in when I first met you. No, Dalton, you're wrong. Randy has changed. He's not that same man anymore. You tell yourself whatever you want, but don't come up to me in public anymore, or anywhere else for that matter, and try to get me to be happy about the fact that you cheated on me with and then left me for a man who treated you and your entire family like complete cow shit. Quit trying to get me to feel good about eating a shit sandwich. Now, if you'll excuse me, my friends are waiting for me." And I left her crying and walked back into the bar and sat back down with Danny, Meg, and Diana. I could see Darla walk back into the bar and take her seat next to Randy. Randy could see she was obviously upset and was talking to her. Darla just shook her head several times and took a drink of her soda. Randy looked over at me with a pissed-off look on his face. I just shook my head once and mouthed the word, "Don't." A couple months had passed by, and I felt no improvement in my personal situation. I just didn't have the desire or the energy to jump back into the quest for female companionship and the elusive chase for my one and only soulmate. I thought I had such a thing with Darla, and we all know how well that turned out. Part of the problem was that people always felt the need to let me know how Randy, Darla, and the kids were doing, regardless of whether I asked or not. When she first left me, some of Darla's friends and family felt it necessary to let me know through casual conversation that she and the kids were doing well, and they were as happy a family as they had ever been. But after a while, things seemed to taper off. Even Meg and Diana, who had become some of Darla's closest friends, started dropping hints that things might not have been what they seemed with Darla and Randy. I kept stoic about it and never pressed for further information, despite knowing that both Meg and Diana were itching to tell me more. It was around the 1st of July that year when Danny suggested heading into Red River Falls and grabbing some dinner and a few beers at the End Zone, which is a very popular sports bar and grill. Getting away from Royal Fork sounded like a good idea. We initially invited Meg, Diana, and their husbands to go along with, but the four of them declined. So it was just me and Danny on a bro date, I guess. We got there around 5 o'clock that evening, and the place was just starting to fill up. It was only an hour until the Twins and the Brewers were set to play an interleague game, and there were plenty of TVs at the End Zone to catch the action. I ordered a massive double-decker guacamole burger, and Danny ordered a cowboy griller, which was a sandwich of one beef patty, a pork patty, and loads of bacon, onions, lettuce, tomato, and a generous amount of jalapenos. Danny would need the beer to put out the fire in his mouth later. We had been there for about an hour or so, and Ricky Nolasco had just fanned his first 2 batters before giving up a solo home run to the Brewers catcher, Jonathan Lucroy. And just like that, the good guys were down 1-0. I figured that was going to be the worst of the night, but I was wrong. I was so very, very wrong. "Ah, shit," Danny said. "What's up, bro?" I asked, turning from the big screen TV above the bar. "Look what the cat just dragged in," he said. I looked towards the main entrance. Walking in was none other than Randy Jones and 4 of his friends. Randy immediately saw Danny and me, said something to his friends, and started walking over to the bar where we were seated. "Danny, Dalton," he said. "How's everybody doing tonight?" He asked with a completely fake air of congeniality. "Do you really give a shit, Randy? Or are you just making polite conversation to help pass what I think we can all agree is a really awkward situation?" "Jesus, Dalton," Danny whispered, trying to calm me down. "Dial it down a notch, okay?" "Yeah, Dalton. I'm just trying to be friendly here. Were you just trying to be friendly when you came back and stole Darla and the kids back from me?" "Hey, Dalton," he said, getting pissed. "I'll have you know that that was my wife you were with for 7 months. The least you could have done was to wait until the divorce was final." "Yeah? How many times did you screw Darla in my house? Huh? Or did you at least have the decency to do it on my deck outside? After all, that's where I found all your damned cigarette butts." Okay, Randy said, backing off. "Clearly I've struck a nerve with you by interrupting your guy date with Danny here. So I'll just go back to my friends and leave you 2 lovebirds all alone." "Watch it, Randy," Danny said, irritated. "I'll keep Dalton from ripping your throat out, but you and I ain't exactly friends, and you sure as hell don't want me for an enemy either." Randy had a cocky grin on his face as Danny stared him away from our seats. Finally, he was seated with his friends on the far side of the restaurant, a good 60 feet or more away. "Shit, Danny," I said, regretting the whole incident. "I'm sorry, dude. Maybe we should just pack it in and head home, huh?" "Hell, no, we came here to have a few laughs. eat some good food and drink some great beer and watch the twins lose with dignity. If we get up and leave now that a-hole wins, Dalton. Yeah, I guess you're right. We should be good to drive with another round, right? Sounds good to me. We sat there watching the ball game for a while when we noticed one of the waitresses, who all dressed like bikini model versions of referees, brought out a large tray full of tall beers. She ended up at Randy's table, and the beers were passed out to each of the men. Boy, I've waited a long time for this. She sure is gonna taste good, I could hear Randy say. Oh, I said, nudging Danny. Looks like old Randy's about to fall off the wagon. Geez, Dalton, he started. Would you just forget about? Danny couldn't finish the words as he saw Randy take a swig of his tall pilsner of beer. Oh shit, that sure as hell doesn't look like non-alcoholic beer. I couldn't help but stare at them as they all downed their first round of beer quickly, which was followed by another round shortly thereafter. They kept up the pace for much of the time while we were there. Finally, about 9 p.m., the Twins had lost by a score of 7-2 to the Brewers. I continuously threw glances over at Randy and his friends during much of the time. At one point, Randy even saw me and raised his glass to me in a mock toast while all of his friends laughed at the cuck who wasn't. We were just getting ready to settle up our tab for the night. Danny and I had each had a total of 3 beers, along with our meals during the nearly 5 hours we had been at the end zone. It was almost 10 o'clock, and we had just settled our tabs and were getting ready to head for the door. I felt a tapping on my shoulder and turned around to find myself staring down at Randy Jones. Hey, Dalton, he slurred. I guess that confirmed whether the beer was an A or not. I just wanted to tell you that there is no hard feelings, okay? Back off, Randy. You're drunk, Danny warned. I ain't that bad, he whined. Tell me something, Randy, I said. Just exactly how far did you have to go when you fell off the wagon? Did it hurt? Oh, I get it, Randy drawled. You're still pissed about Donna, right? Randy continued to follow us out of the restaurant, with his equally inebriated friends in tow. You want to know the real reason why Darla came crawling back to me, Dalton? It's because she loves my tool, dude. She can't get enough of it. Maybe I'm not as tall as you and Danny, but I got a sledgehammer in my pants, he yelled. His buddies just continued laughing at us. By the way, I want to tell you that I appreciate the fact that you don't have as big of a tool as me. I couldn't take much more, and Danny knew it. Dalton, just calm down. He's just trying to get under your skin, okay? Yeah, well, he's almost there, I said as we got to my Taurus. Just then, Randy made the critical mistake of putting his hand on my shoulder and spinning me around. Hey dude, he slurred. It's pretty rude to walk away when I'm talking to ya. All of you guys back off right now, Danny warned. I'm a Mason County Deputy Sheriff, and I will have all of you arrested for public intox if you don't turn around and walk back into the bar. I ain't afraid of no dipshit cop, one of Randy's friends challenged. Yeah, what the hell, Dalton? You need your buddy for protection? Randy jeered. Then Randy proceeded to reach forward with both hands and violently shove me into the side of my own car hard enough to leave a dent where my left hip slammed into it. Without thinking, I went on autopilot. I immediately threw an uppercut haymaker and caught Randy Jones right on the underside of his chin, causing his head to be thrown back wildly as he collapsed on the parking lot pavement and struck the back of his head hard. He was out cold before he hit the ground. Ah, shit, Dalton, Danny yelled as 2 of Randy's friends made a move towards him. Danny initially disabled the first attacker by utilizing a wicked pressure point hold on the guy's wrist and forearm and brought him to his knees. But Danny quickly realized that simply neutralizing them wasn't going to work as we had 3 more guys to deal with. Danny immediately applied an insane amount of pressure to get his opponent to shriek and then kicked him in the chest, knocking him back on the ground. The bad guy wasn't out of the fight, but Danny had given him plenty to think about. Come on, a-hole, I yelled to one of the other guys. That got his attention, and I immediately brought my hands near my face in a defensive and offensive position. I made a few juke-type moves as he closed in, with another of Randy's buddies close behind. Just as I feigned that I was about to strike the guy in the head, I lunged forward with as much force as I could and kicked the guy in the crotch as hard as possible. In his drunken state, he was too slow to react to my fake attack to the head and couldn't defend his balls. He let out a blood-curdling scream as he, too, collapsed onto the pavement. The guy standing behind him was shocked by what had happened. I lunged forward towards him, keeping the momentum of my attack going. My right hand was still hurting from the first punch I gave to Randy, and I opted to throw a vicious elbow right into the left side of his face. I could immediately feel his jaw give way as he, too, hit the pavement. I looked over towards Danny, and he had obviously had his way with the two clowns he had been dealing with. Fortunately for us, all 5 of the men were way over the limit and weren't nearly coordinated enough to mount a serious fight. But one of the men Danny had been fighting was slowly backing away from Danny. He reached behind his back and clumsily fished out a fairly large buck knife. Immediately, Danny's training kicked in, and he quickly drew his concealed Springfield XD.45 from inside his waist. It suddenly became clear to me why Danny always wore shirts that were extra long in the waist and never tucked them in. Mason County Deputy Sheriff, drop the weapon. Drop it now. Randy's buddy immediately got a terrified look in his eyes. Even in his drunken haze, he was smart enough to throw the big knife to his side. I immediately looked to my right and could see the guy that I had kicked in the nuts moments earlier was now getting to his feet. He gave me an evil stare and appeared to be getting ready to make a bum rush towards me. I cut off his attack by sprinting the short distance to him and threw my right knee into the side of his face as he was struggling to get to his feet. My knee made good contact with his left ear and jaw, and he flopped back to the ground completely unconscious. Danny was yelling at me, but, in my rage, I couldn't hear a word he was saying. I immediately looked back towards Randy Jones, who was now semi-conscious and struggling to get back to his feet. Randy got to his knees, shouted something completely unintelligible to me, and attempted to reach out and grab me. I put every last ounce of my body weight into it and threw the most pulverizing overhand right cross that I could, and made exceptionally good contact with the bridge of his nose. The blood immediately started gushing out as my punch sent Randy flying backwards again onto the pavement. I also felt an immediate and excruciatingly sharp pain in my right hand and knew that I had broken at least one bone in my right hand. It was at that point, when I knew that all 5 of the men had been neutralized, that Danny's voice finally became intelligible again through the fog of my own rage. "Dalton, for God's sake, stop. It's over. If you keep this going, we're both going to go to jail and lose our jobs." I stopped in my tracks and looked around. Danny still had his weapon drawn and was keeping it on the man who previously had the knife. 4 men were lying on the pavement, and we were starting to draw a crowd of onlookers, and I could hear the sounds of approaching sirens. The entire fight had lasted barely over a minute from the first moment Randy had shoved me into my car. In the light of the overhead parking lot lights, I could see a piece of red mass lying on the pavement along with a couple of white specks that I knew had to be teeth. As for the reddish mass of flesh, I would find out later that I had inadvertently caused Randy to bite off the tip of his own tongue with my first punch. Soon, the first black and white squad car from the Red River Falls Police Department had pulled into the lot and made an abrupt stop. The officer got out of his car and immediately drew his own firearm and pointed it directly at Danny, who still had his gun drawn on the guy with the knife. "Police officer, drop the weapon. Drop it now," the cop shouted. "Mason County Sheriff Deputy," Danny answered, showing the officer his wallet badge with his left hand and keeping his gun aimed at the dude who had the knife. "This man drew a knife on me and my friend a minute ago. He threw it over there," he gestured. "You just about ran over it with your right front tire. I'm going to disarm the weapon now and place it on the pavement." The nervous young officer watched as Danny did so and then visibly relaxed. Still, he keyed his lapel microphone and radioed for backup that he had a 10-10, or fight, in progress. Within 2 minutes, 3 more police cars showed up, including one belonging to one of the police captains, Pete Sturgeon. Danny was none too happy to see Sturgeon, for whatever reason. He never told me why, but it was clear he didn't care for the man. I was mortified when 2 ambulances from the Red River Falls Fire Department showed up and began attending to the wounded. I had really done a number on Randy Jones and his face, as well as his friend, Wade Ryan, who was the guy I kneed in the face a while ago. When a friend and coworker of mine, Monica Banner, approached me and asked me if I was okay, I just said yes. I knew my hand was probably broken and I was delaying the inevitable. At some point, I was going to have to get my hand looked at. Danny and I got questioned over and over again about the fight, what led up to it, and who threw the first punch. It appeared like the police officers were absolutely giddy over the fact that they had a sheriff's deputy on the hook for being involved in the fight. About 30 minutes after the whole fiasco started, a royal blue Ford F-150 crew cab pulled into the parking lot. I saw Danny visibly take and exhale a deep breath as he watched the Ford get parked. I couldn't tell if it was a sigh of relief or one of impending doom. As the driver exited, I could see that it was Danny's boss, Pat Quinn, the sheriff of Mason County. He walked directly over to where Danny and I were standing by one of the RFFD ambulances. Danny was going to try and say something, but Pat just gave him a stern look and said, "Not now." Pat stopped a few feet away and then approached the police captain, Pete Sturgeon. "So, what's the story, Pete?" Pat asked. "Well, looks like one of your boys was involved in an altercation tonight, Sheriff." "Yes, it would seem that way," Pat said, annoyed. "But what is the story you have so far on how it started?" "Well, 2 of the guys have already been taken to the hospital. Seems your deputy and his friend worked them over pretty good. The other 3 said that their friend, Randy, was provoked by Anderson and your deputy." "I hope you thought to get Danny's side of the story, too, Pete," Quinn said, obviously irritated. "We're going to get everyone's statement, Pat, to ascertain exactly what happened. Trust me, I know how law enforcement works, okay?" "Yeah, well, I'm going inside to talk to the manager," Pat said, walking off towards the door. "What good is the manager going to do, Pat? She was inside the whole time." "You see those little bubble-looking things on the corners of the buildings, Pete? Those are called video cameras. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that at least 1 or more of those caught the whole incident on tape. I'm also going to go out on a limb and assume that there are cameras inside the building that probably caught whatever led up to this, too." Sturgeon was obviously caught flat-footed. "Yeah, I know there are cameras, Pat, but we still have to get statements, too." "Well, you might save yourself some time if you just go in and ask the manager to check out the video and audio," Quinn said as he walked into the building. "Tell you what, Pete, I'll go ahead and do it for you." 3 patrol officers, a police sergeant, and a police lieutenant did their best to stifle giggles and snickers as they were obviously embarrassed by their captain's lack of observation. But, to their discredit, none of them had seen the cameras either. In fact, only now that Quinn had pointed them out did I even notice them myself. To a casual observer, they looked like anything but a camera and more like a burned-out light as they closely resembled the rest of the exterior lighting of the end zone. Sturgeon ended up grudgingly following Quinn inside the restaurant. They were inside for nearly 30 minutes and my hand was hurting more and more each second. Finally, Sturgeon and Quinn came back outside. We were informed that Randy Jones, Wade Ryan, and the rest of their buddies were going to be charged with assault, public intoxication, and disorderly conduct. At this time, Danny and I were told we were not going to be charged with anything, but that we shouldn't get our hopes up as the investigation was going to continue, and there was the possibility we could each end up with a disorderly conduct charge. Danny didn't think it was likely, since they didn't charge us initially, but I didn't know the difference and I was kind of worried. It was almost midnight by the time the police had everything wrapped up. Randy Jones and Wade Ryan would be informed of their arrest at the hospital. We all received either a field breathalyzer test or blood alcohol test for Randy and Wade, but Danny and I both only blew a 0.04 and 0.05 respectively, well under the legal limit. The other 5 had tested between a 0.15 and a 0.2. "Well, are you guys proud of yourselves?" Quinn asked as he came back to me and Danny. "Look, Pat, it wasn't our fault," Danny tried to explain. "Yeah, I know. I saw the tapes. You guys got provoked inside the restaurant and let those idiots follow you all the way out to the parking lot and allowed them to goad you 2 into a physical altercation. The part that was your fault was not having the common sense to call a cop and put an end to it when the 5 of them started to follow you out here. What the hell did you 2 think was going to happen?" Danny and I could only look away in shame. "Guys like that, gentlemen," Pat continued to scold, "are only looking for one thing, a reaction. Well, guess what? You gave them exactly what they wanted." "Look, Pat," Danny started. "I can explain." "You see," Pat cut him off. "Don't even start with me, Danny. How do you think I'm going to feel having to explain to people that one of my deputies was in a bar, drinking alcoholic beverages, proceeded to get into a very public confrontation and then, to top it all off, ended up drawing his own firearm during the confrontation. Oh God, Pat, the guy drew a knife on me. I had legitimate reason to fear for my life. I know, Danny. I'm well aware of that. Hell, if we're being technical, you probably would have been totally justified to put 2 slugs in his chest. Would that make you feel any better? No, Danny said like an admonished child. It's my fault, Sheriff, I chimed in, trying to deflect some of Quinn's heat away from Danny. It is both your faults, Quinn corrected. How do you think Chief Van Dyke is going to react when he hears about this? Think Jerry will give you a big pat on the back? Definitely not, I said, sheepishly. My boss, Chief Gerald Van Dyke, was ridiculously concerned with the image of his department, and I could easily be looking at a suspension, whether I was charged or not. Yeah, you didn't think about that little detail, did you? Well, I'll probably have plenty of time to think about it after the fact. I'm pretty sure my right hand is broken. Yeah, I'm sure Van Dyke will absolutely love you for that. I'd imagine he'll be paying some pretty hefty overtime to cover your shifts for the next few weeks, huh? All right. Pat, you made your point, Danny interrupted. Look, we got goaded into a fight, all right? But it wasn't just some random bar fight, okay? This guy had it out for Dalton. He confronted us the minute they walked in the door and was being a smart bum from the word go. Dalton had been in relationship with Darla Jones for over 6 months. She had been living with him for, 3 months? 4, he said, looking at me. A little over 4, I replied. Yeah, for months, Danny continued. Darla and Randy were getting a divorce. They were only like a month away from finalizing it. Then Randy comes back to town, makes all kinds of overtures and promises, gets in her head and starts sleeping with Darla behind Dalton's back, and she ends up leaving Dalton to go back to Randy. Tonight was just Randy throwing it in Dalton's face and provoking him, basically trying to make Dalton look like some kind of chicken or cuck in front of the whole restaurant. I winced as Danny said cuck, but the funny thing was I noticed that Sheriff Quinn did too. Immediately, Quinn started calming down and rubbing his face. Gone was the bad cop, and the good cop was starting to make an appearance. Randy Jones, Randy Jones, Randy Jones, Quinn said, shaking his head and pacing. You know who he is? I asked. Hell yes, I know who Randy Jones is. He's an idiot. Christ, I gave that douche canoe his first OWI about 6 years ago when I was still on Red River PD. Danny and I both chuckled a bit. Look guys, Quinn said, much calmer. I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, okay? Like I said, people like Randy Jones are only good at one thing in life. Provoking people and getting a reaction from them. I expect you, Danny, to be better than that. And I know Chief Van Dyke expects you to be better than that, too, Dalton. You guys are the good guys. People like them would love nothing better than to bring you down to their level. You guys are the ones who have something to lose, not Randy Jones and his clown but friends, okay? Yeah, okay, I said. I read ya, Pat, Danny said. Danny, take Dalton over to the emergency department to get that hand fixed up, okay? Will do, Pat. I handed Danny the keys to my car as he was obviously in better shape to drive than I was. But before we could get far, Quinn walked back over to my vehicle. I rolled down the passenger side window so we could talk. Just one more thing, Dalton, Quinn started. I know you said your relationship with Darla Jones was over with, but have you considered how all of this might affect her? I said tersely no. And frankly, I don't really give 2 shits either. I told her the day she left that I wasn't going to be her backup plan. I even warned her that it was just a matter of time before Randy's dumb but fell off the wagon. Frankly, I'm surprised it took this long. Yeah, me too, Pat said. But, you want to know something? My ex-wife and I ended our marriage on anything other than good terms. In fact, we got even less friendly after the divorce was finalized. But even after everything that went down between us, I still care about Clarissa. I'm going to bet that you probably still care about Darla too. So, if I were you, I'd be concerned about how tonight's festivities might impact her and their kids, if they have any. They have 2, a boy and a girl, I replied. You and Danny did a pretty good number on Randy and his friends tonight. Once Randy gets sober and gets bailed out of jail, how is that going to sit with him knowing that he got his butt whipped by his wife's ex-lover? Just some food for thought. But if I were you, I'd think about keeping an eye on Darla and the kids in case Randy really takes a swan dive off the old crazy board. Oh God, I hadn't even remotely thought about that. Hell, I'll do that, Sheriff, I said. Hey, Sheriff, do you think there's still a possibility that Danny and I could get charged with disorderly conduct? Not a chance, Quinn smiled. You sure? What if the PD asks for charges from the county attorney? They seemed awfully giddy about getting a deputy in trouble tonight. Sheriff Quinn chuckled out loud. Don't worry about that for 1 second, Dalton. I can be pretty damn persuasive when it comes to the county attorney, Marion Lawson. If I say you won't be charged, then you won't be charged. Quinn laughed all the way back to his truck, and Danny proceeded to drive me to the emergency department, where an x-ray revealed that I did, indeed, have a broken third metacarpal, the bone just below my right middle finger. They proceeded to put a cast on it, and I would be off work for the next 6 to 8 weeks. Fortunately, we have short-term disability through the city, and I wouldn't have to go the entire time without being paid. Needless to say, Quinn was right. Chief Van Dyke was not happy. He didn't suspend me, but he did try to give me a formal reprimand, which basically meant that I would be suspended without pay if I incurred any future disciplinary action, regardless if on duty or off, in the next 2 years. Fortunately, my International Association of Firefighters Union Local got involved and filed a grievance on my behalf. The physical and video evidence was proof that I was not the one who instigated the altercation. A Civil Service Board hearing was convened to consider the matter, and it was resolved in my favor. Chief Van Dyke growled about it, but accepted the decision. The whole affair gave me some time off for the rest of July and a good chunk of August. I tried to stay as busy as I could and worked on some projects around the house. I could still mow my own lawn without much trouble and worked on a few other things as well. My scheduled shifts at Eagle Star were canceled for the next couple of months, with relatively little hassle. One of the full-time flight paramedics there, Alex Trotman, was more than happy to pick up some overtime along with the rest of the crew. Even though I wasn't allowed to work at RRFFD while on sick leave, I still decided to answer the pager for the Royal Fork Fire and Rescue for medical calls only, as long as I didn't try to lift the patient. We had a pretty good crew of people who always responded to calls, and it was rare when we had less than 4 or 5 people show up. And so it was in late July we were in the middle of a very, very nasty heat wave. Temperatures were constantly in the mid-90s, which isn't so bad compared to some places in the Southwest. But in the upper Midwest, you have to take into consideration the incredible humidity that we are prone to getting, which had been consistently 85% and higher for most of the heat wave. When the humidity is that high, you can't cool off because there is so much moisture in the air. You can sweat, but it won't evaporate, and you just feel warm and sticky all the time, and not in a good way. July had not been a good month so far for Randy Jones. He had indeed been charged with assault, public intoxication, and disorderly conduct. Oh, and he was missing a few teeth. He was probably going to serve a minimum of 30 days in jail and possibly up to 60 days. And that was only if his court-appointed attorney could get the charges reduced from misdemeanor assault to simple assault. The public intox and disorderly conduct would only get him a night in jail, if that. But Randy was also looking at the very real possibility of losing the lucrative welding job that he had working for one of the oil companies up north. He had been getting paid about $50 an hour, which meant he was easily pulling down over 6 figures with overtime. He had been staying at company-provided housing up north for a week at a time, and then spending a week at home. He was working 12 to 16-hour days and making good money. The problem was, he was spending it just as fast, too. And nobody knew what he was spending it on. Darla and the kids were staying in the same apartment building that they had been before the divorce was filed. So Randy had obviously not improved their financial situation much. And so, if you combine the insufferable heat wave with a whole host of personal and legal problems, it can create nothing short of a time bomb. And anyone in EMS or law enforcement can tell you that domestic assaults skyrocket during heat waves. It was a Friday afternoon. The temperature was still 96 degrees with 95% humidity out, and the whole day had been absolutely insufferable. Our aging town pool actually had to turn people away due to the number of them trying to find relief with a cool swim. The pager went off that day around 4:30 p.m. Royal Fork Fire and Rescue, Royal Fork Fire and Rescue. You are needed for a medical response at 431 4th Avenue Northeast. Again, you are needed for a medical response at 431 4th Avenue Northeast in Royal Fork for a female patient who has been assaulted. Mason County deputies and State Patrol have also been dispatched. Time of call is 16:27. Oh shit, that was Darla's parents' house. I grabbed my keys and jumped in my car. I sped to the fire station, which was located on Main Street. The ambulance had already been pulled out of the station and was waiting with the emergency lights already activated. I parked the car and quickly jumped aboard the ambulance. Jake Herman was our driver today. Meg and Diana were both on board, as was Misty Kiefer, another volunteer EMT. I sat up front with Jake and manned the radio. Mason County Dispatch, this is Royal Fork Rescue Adam 401. You can show us en route to 431 4th Avenue Northeast. We'll be staging approximately 2 blocks away until you advise law enforcement is on the scene. 10-4. Adam 401. Mason County Deputy 17 to 15 is almost on scene and will advise when it is safe to approach. I show you en route at 1631. It took us less than 2 minutes to arrive in the area, and my stomach suddenly felt like it was filled with 2 million butterflies. Dispatch, Adam 401 is in the area. Please advise when we can approach. Copy. Adam 401. 17 to 15 advises that the suspect has left the residence and it is safe to approach. 10-4. Dispatch. You can show us on scene. We quickly sped the last 2 blocks until we pulled up in front of Darla's parents' house. The house was a typical ranch home with a 1-stall garage. It was in decent condition. Darla's dad, Butch Kent, had worked at the town lumber yard his whole life. He wasn't exactly made of money, but he did okay for his family. Danny greeted me as we approached the house. He said nothing, but just shook his head when he saw me walk up the front porch stairs. We entered the front door of the house and I saw Butch and Cecilia, Darla's mom, both of them weeping and kneeling by the sofa next to their daughter. I felt the blood literally rush out from my face as I saw Darla's battered and bruised little body. Darla's left eye was completely swollen shut, and she also had a nasty open cut above her left eyebrow that had bled badly. Her left cheek appeared swollen, but also misshapen. The bottom lip had been punched so hard that her lower left eye tooth had completely punctured through her bottom lip. She had all manner of bruises and abrasions on her forearms. It appeared that she had done her best to defend herself. Her right wrist was badly broken and looked like it had needed a road map. Such was the severity of the angle due to the break. Darla was also clutching her ribs and abdomen, and she had no doubt been repeatedly punched and kicked in both places. Butch, Cecilia, can either of you tell me what happened? I asked gingerly. That son of a bitch, Randy, Butch sobbed. Cecilia and I were gone for just a couple of hours. That a-hole came over here and beat the shit out of her. Suddenly, it hit me. Where are Natalie and Nathan? They're next door playing, Cecilia sobbed. The scumsucker at least had the sense to not do this in front of them. I started examining Darla from head to toe. There didn't appear to be any cerebrospinal fluid leaking from her ears, and there was no bruising behind her ears either, which might indicate a basal skull fracture. That would have been very, very bad. Both of her pupils were equal but dilated as I very gently opened her eyelids. She obviously had a concussion, and she didn't really recognize that I was there at first. She had some well-defined bruising starting to form around her neck. Randy had obviously tried to strangle her, which was almost synonymous with domestic abuse. Darla's chest had deep bruises on both sides. I listened intently to both of her lungs and was relieved to hear good air flow on both sides. She flinched a bit when I gently examined her tummy. Again, I could hear good bowel sounds in all quadrants of her abdomen, which indicated there was probably no internal abdominal bleeding or perforated hollow organs. I didn't want to expose her too much in front of her parents, but I had to check her entire chest. I gently lifted up the t-shirt she was wearing. Darla hadn't been wearing a bra, for some reason, and I was startled and horrified by what I saw on her jug's human bite marks, at least a dozen of them. I immediately put her shirt down and said nothing, as I'm sure her father, Butch, would have blown a gasket right then and there and probably would have gone looking for Randy to surely kill him. Let's get the cot in here and get ready to transport, I told the rest of the crew. Jake and Misty went to the ambulance to retrieve the cot while Meg and Diana monitored Darla's vital signs for me. Her blood pressure was slightly elevated at 145/95. Her pulse was 55, and her respirations were between 8 and 10 per minute. These were signs that there may, indeed, be a closed head injury. It also might be just temporary due to the concussion. We wouldn't know until she had a head CT scan at the hospital. Her oxygen saturation was 97%, which was good. We gently moved Darla from the sofa to the cot and strapped her in. She had whimpered a little bit as we did so. We quickly got Darla moved to the ambulance and got ready to go. Jake jumped back up front to drive while Meg, Diana, Misty and I took care of Darla in the back. I grabbed the IV kit and immediately started an IV in Darla's right hand. I was thankful at that moment that I was left-handed and could still even start an IV. A good sign was when Darla woke up immediately, opening her right eye as I poked the needle under her skin. Darla absolutely hated needles and had an abhorrent fear of them, as well as bees and other stinging insects. Darla seemed lucid for a few moments as I started the IV, and a horrified look came over her face as she recognized me. She was obviously humiliated and embarrassed for me to have seen her this way, and she immediately closed her one good eye and turned her head to the left to look away from me. "Darla, can you hear me okay?" I asked softly. She said nothing, only nodding her head yes as she began to quietly weep. "This is only going to sting for a little bit until I get the IV in, okay?" She only winced as I poked the needle forward. I hit a good vein in her left hand and was rewarded with a quick show of blood in the IV catheter's flash chamber. I removed the metal stylus, holding pressure in the vein, and attached the IV tubing and started a slow drip of normal saline. Diana had applied the patches from our cardiac monitor, which showed us that Darla's heart rate had increased to around 70 beats per minute and her blood pressure was now showing 132/88, which was also an improvement. I continuously asked questions of Darla as I continued to treat her and care for her on the way to the hospital. I took a bottle of sterile water, wetted a washcloth, and gingerly cleaned up some of the blood on her lips, nose, and eyes. We had also applied a splint to her right wrist, which was obviously and badly broken. Although she still had a good pulse and color in the right hand, thankfully, Darla would only answer questions by tenderly shaking or nodding her head. She continued to cry softly, refusing to look at me. I sat there looking at her and felt completely helpless to do more to alleviate her pain and suffering. Suddenly, it became clear that my confrontation with Randy just a few weeks ago had played a large part in what happened to Darla. I began to feel immense shame, but it was obvious that Darla felt an even larger degree of shame, embarrassment, and humiliation. Everything that I had predicted would happen with Randy had come to pass. For some reason, I couldn't help myself. I stood up from my seat, straddled the lower end of the ambulance cot, and sat down, facing Darla. I gently lifted her legs up and scooted towards her, unbuckling the belts that secured her to the cot. I gently helped her to a sitting position, which was all the more awkward due to the soft splint that I had on my own right hand. I gently placed Darla's injured right arm and hand behind my back and ever so softly pulled her into my embrace. Darla immediately buried her head in my shoulder, being careful of her swollen, wounded left eye, and began sobbing uncontrollably. I said nothing at all. I just looked forward towards the front of the ambulance and just held Darla in my arms, doing my best to let her know that, at least for the moment, she was safe. "Oh God, Dalton," she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She continued to wail, and I could feel the tears build up in my own eyes. The other 3 girls in the back of the ambulance said nothing, just watched us. They, too, all got tears in their eyes, and both Diana and Misty had to cover their mouths to keep from sobbing. I nodded to Meg and asked her to please make a quick report to the hospital to let them know that we were getting close, which she did. I continued to hold Darla in my arms, gently soothing her and telling her everything would be all right. By the time we got to the hospital, she had calmed somewhat, but was still whimpering from time to time. I rose from the cot, gently laying her back down and securing the cot straps back in place. I took her left hand in mine as we wheeled her from the ambulance into the emergency department at Holy Family Medical Center. We then gently slid her from our cot to the bed. Shelley Stebbins was the nurse in the ER who took charge of Darla. As we wheeled her in, I could see the look of shock and horror on Shelley's face, dumbfounded as to the kind of monster who could do this to someone they professed to love. Someone who was the mother of their own children. 30-year-old female. Personal physician is Dr. Laughlin. Victim of an assault. No blood or CSF present in the ears. Obvious right wrist fracture, severe laceration and swelling to the left eye, and a puncture wound to the bottom lip. Heavy bruising to right and left side of the ribs. Abdomen is soft. Lung sounds and bowel sounds are all clear and present. And there's, bite marks to both the right and left breast. I could see and hear Shelley gasp as I said that. 18-gauge IV in the left hand with normal saline. Running TKO. Did you give her anything for pain? Shelley asked. Negative. Good chance she has a concussion, at a minimum, and we didn't want to suppress CNS any further. Okay, Dalton. Thanks. I'll take it from here, Shelley said as she started getting Darla settled in. Dalton? I turned and looked back into the room as Darla weakly called out to me. Hun? Dalton, please don't leave me. Will you please stay with me? I didn't know what to do. I didn't really even know what to say. Well, your mom and dad are both on their way to the hospital. In fact, they're probably here right now. Your kids are gonna stay at the house next to your parents. I don't care, Dalton. Will you stay with me? Please don't go. I have to go, Darla. I need to go back with the ambulance. I have to write the report and help get the ambulance back in service. I'm sorry, but I really can't stay. Darla started crying again as I gently pulled my hand away from hers and walked to the door of the room. I gave her one last look before leaving, and suddenly, I felt like the biggest a-hole and heel in the world. But I couldn't stand to look at her beaten body anymore. I couldn't stand the shame. I walked back out to the ambulance garage and saw the rest of the crew just finishing up getting the ambulance put back in order. I had grabbed the necessary paperwork and hospital insurance forms and set them on the front passenger's seat. It dawned on me that Jake, Misty, Meg, and Diana were all staring at me.